What I'm going to do is just give you a brief description of Scotland and alcohol and the relationship of alcohol, and tell you who SHAAP are and why we've been instrumental in terms of shaping policy in Scotland. I'm going to talk about the problems we have, the historical antecedents, say a little bit about how what we believe is evidence-based policy was formulated and adopted, note the persistent opposition of the alcohol industry to that, illustrate why minimum unit pricing is vitally important, challenge 6 of the myths and lies perpetrated by its opponents, including in this newspaper today, a year to the day when minimum unit pricing was supposed to have been implemented, and it hasn't been yet because of the industry's opposition to that. And I'm going to finally call on the industry to reverse that opposition, which is anti-democratic and anti-health. So this is Scotland, different perspectives of this. You can either see us as a small country in the middle of Europe, or you can see us as a tourist destination, or you can see us as a crime destination, or if you're Alex Salmond, you'd probably have that, but you'd have it much bigger. And our relationship with alcohol is pretty complex as well. So you can either see it as problematic, you can either see it as a source of national pride or a source of national shame. And just to kind of, I don't know which one you would regard this as being, this is Danny Alexander down at the bottom, who's welcoming the new chief executive of the Scotch Whisky Association, which is the main litigant in the court case against the Scottish Government on minimum unit pricing, to his new job directly as he left the Department of Business in the UK. So just to give you an idea of who we are, we're a network, we're a partnership of the medical Royal Colleges in Scotland, working for effective alcohol policy and to promote good practice in alcohol services. And this is our membership, so we include all the medical Royal Colleges, and that partnership approach has been really, really important in terms of being able to speak authoritatively about the issues. But just to say that although our main priority is public health, alcohol is not simply a public health issue. And these figures, obviously 70% of assaults coming into to emergency departments are alcohol related. There are substantial costs to the Treasury, and 96% of Scots see alcohol abuse, including our own, and I say our own, not their own, as a problem. And this is historical precedent. Does anyone know who these people are? You might recognise one. No? One of them is a defeated candidate for the Dundee constituency, Winston Churchill, in 1922, who was defeated by Edwin Scrymgeour of the Prohibition Party, who held his seat for more than a decade. And so even way back in the middle of the century, there were substantial concerns about alcohol use in the Scottish population. But this is the same slide that Nick presented earlier. I want to challenge, however, the idea that there's something cultural about the drunken Scotsman, that it's always been in our culture. We have historically high levels of alcohol use. These are UK, but in the early part of the century and in the middle of the century, that wasn't the case. So we can actually act to change that situation. And this is just to show you how we drink considerably more than the English, both in pubs and elsewhere. The blue lines are Scotland, the red lines are England. So we've got far more of a problem than you have. So there is more impetus to us to actually take the action that we've been taking. And this is why Scottish health professionals have been so concerned about alcohol. This is the impact on mortality and the morbidity of the population. The strain on alcohol causes a strain on health and other public services and harms to others. And compared to other countries, we're going in the opposite direction, and we're going in a far more extreme direction than the rest of the UK. So we've got things to do. But what? In 2003, the World Health Organization reviewed the effectiveness of alcohol interventions, And they recognise the importance of pursuing a range of measures, including population measures and measures targeted towards particularly vulnerable groups. And it's notable that WHO identify price and availability as two key components of a successful alcohol strategy. And what we had, I think, was a kind of a wonderful situation in Scotland where we had coming together of research evidence, global research evidence, with local advocacy, and this is SHAAP. SHAAP organised this workshop on price policy and public health in 2007. And also with a government that wanted to come in and demonstrate that it was different from what had gone before. So we were lucky to have all of that kind of coinciding, and that's how we ended up with the alcohol strategy that we have here, which was adopted in 2009, but influenced by international research and local advocacy. But everything isn't perfect. Just to say, it's really not all perfect. Current practice and service provision is varied, but there have been massive expansion in interventions, especially alcohol brief interventions, where we've got the first really properly national programme of brief interventions exceeding its targets in terms of delivery. And there are cost benefits. I just want to caution, though, against, I understand that there's this impetus to always measure everything in cost terms. A life, we can't really put a cost on a life, so, but just to say that this is what NICE estimates by having these health interventions you save in terms of costs to the Treasury. And alongside that, we have other interventions. So it's actually it's important to be comprehensive in your approaches. So we've been promoting screening and brief interventions, drawing attention to links, for example, with cancer. And all of this within a context where we've had constantly inappropriate, unethical industry behaviours, which we've also thought it important to draw attention to. This is Prestwick Airport. This is normalisation of drinking at breakfast time, breakfast and pint. You might look at that and you might be shocked at it at the moment. Maybe in 5 years, when you've been going through the airport and you've been seeing that every time you're going through the airport, it might not seem so odd to you. Just in the same way that having Heineken behind the goalposts in the bottom poster doesn't seem odd to many people. However, we do believe that broadly the actions in Scotland have followed the WHO Global Alcohol Strategy in relation to population measures to reduce alcohol-related harms, and action on increasing the price of cheapest and the most dangerous drinks is a central component of our strategy. And I'm sorry, I am actually going to major a wee bit on minimum unit pricing on this one. These are the affordability trends of off and on sales alcohol between 1987 and 2010, and you can see that it mirrors pretty closely the harms that have actually occurred. And whereas the alcohol industry make a big play for the fact that we've actually got some reductions in recent years, that's from historically high positions. As alcohol has become more affordable, alcohol-related admissions have followed a very similar trend. So pricing, action on pricing, is absolutely central to what we actually we've needed to be doing. And so the SNP government legislated for minimum unit pricing. It was legislated with no opposition. Well, actually that's not true. One rather silly MSP accidentally pressed the wrong button, and so we do have one SNP vote against minimum unit pricing, but that was accidental. It was overwhelmingly supported by the Scottish Government, and it should have been in place exactly a year ago today. And it would have been if it hadn't been for big business marshalling its resources behind the gloss of the Scotch Whisky Association to challenge the policy in court. The first round of the challenge was defeated, but they vowed, and they continue to vow, to take it as far as they can. And that's totally in line with research that highlights that alcohol industry actors' tactics have been not dissimilar to big tobacco. So they've consistently opposed whole population approaches, favouring targeted interventions, focusing on problem drinkers, emphasising individual responsibility, distorting evidence, influencing funding and publication in biased ways, and as I say, doing what the tobacco industry did before them. And I want to just kind of describe to you now what they've been doing in relation to that in minimum unit pricing. It's quite interesting. I wrote my speech. I finished my speech, my presentation yesterday, and I got this today. And 4 out of 6 of these are quoted in 2 paragraphs from the Scotch Whisky Association on page 2 of this newspaper. And I think that's funny, they've missed out the other one. So they missed out the one about poverty. But I went on to the BBC and somebody else from the Scotch Whisky Association mentioned the poverty one. They added in another one, which is about the whisky gloss. So minimum unit pricing is apparently going to affect Scotch whisky, not cheap vodkas and ciders. I hadn't thought of that one. That will go in my next presentation. Thank you, Scotch Whisky Association. So, first of all, lies and misinformation, and Sarah talked about this in her presentation. They say there's no evidence for effectiveness. In fact, we've got the Sheffield modelling, which demonstrates changes in consumption, and we've set the minimum price at 50p, and the estimated changes in consumption are 7.2% in 2009. They also say we've got no empirical data. We do have empirical data now from British Columbia, which shows demonstrable drops in alcohol-related hospital admissions and deaths when you have a rise in average minimum price. They say that minimum pricing punishes the responsible majority for the behaviour of few. That's contrary to Holmes et al. And the Lancet, where they found that irrespective of income, moderate drinkers were little affected by the minimum price, and in fact the greatest effects are noted for harmful drinkers. And in fact, this is a slide kind of showing the price distribution of pure alcohol sold off trade in Scotland, and the red line there is 50p. So you can see that most of what's sold is actually below the 50p. Of course, the industry haven't thought that they would actually kind of open up and give us access to sales figures to their sales figures, and this also doesn't include Aldi and Lidl, the discount retailers. So we'd expect some more to kind of be in at the cheaper end as well. Other lies and information. People argue that tax would be better than MUP. It's not either or. The tax system, a fair tax system, should work in conjunction with minimum pricing. In relation to the EU, duty directives mean that excise duty can't be used to achieve the same outcomes as MUP, and a system which results in higher prices for higher strength alcohol is more consistent with health aims than one which results in similar prices for alcohol of different strengths. This was the one that I thought that the Scotch Whisky Association might not really be concerned about, but it seems that Rosemary Gallagher is not the chief executive. That it unfairly affects the poor. And I mean, what Holmes et al. Found that because harmful drinkers and low income purchase more alcohol at less than the minimum pricing, this policy actually benefits the poor more than affecting them. But it's this kind of idea, or you're spoiling people's opportunity to enjoy themselves. Despite facts like this, which demonstrate that if you're poor and drink in a harmful or hazardous manner, your health and social functioning is far more likely to be affected than if you were more well off. The right-hand side here is the most deprived categories, and alcohol-related deaths in the most deprived sections of Scottish society are at that level compared to that level for the least deprived. Just to say also, these are also the same groups who are cynically targeted with cheap alcohol. There's some recent studies. I'm constantly frustrated by some academic studies which take too long to come out to be properly influential with policy. So I understand Sarah's point on that. There's some studies being done at University of Edinburgh which have drawn attention, for example, to the over-provision of off-licences in the most deprived neighbourhoods. So these neighbourhoods are being targeted for selling cheap alcohol. What we have had in relation to the recent drops in alcohol-related deaths, the biggest improvements have been within the most deprived groups, and that's a move in the right direction, but it's absolutely not a cause for complacency, because they are also the groups who are most harmed by alcohol. And that's contrary to what the industry is saying as well. Everything's getting better, so we don't need any new regulation. Again, this ignores the historic size of our problem, and actually recent reductions relate. We've been in a financial crisis. Alcohol has actually become effectively more expensive. So the fact that we've got drops make the case for minimum pricing rather than the case against it. And as I say, this is the historical position. You've got these drops at the end, but look where we were in 1982. And my final point, I'm not going to read all of these out to you, but the argument is that that minimum unit pricing is illegal. There has been one court hearing which comprehensively dismissed the Scotch Whisky Association's arguments about the legality of it. It found that minimum unit pricing was an appropriate health-focused policy. It was not trade restrictive. It was appropriate to be dealt with in a Scottish context, not in a European context, and there was no proper basis for the industry's opposition to it. It's now 1 year to the day when minimum pricing should have been introduced, and as I say, today SHAAP and our partners, including Syrian, who are concerned about public health, have written an open letter to the Scotch Whisky Association, its members and partners, asking them to immediately drop the legal challenge and to bow to the will of the Scottish Parliament. So let's wait and see what they're going to do about that.